Monday in Maple Ridge began as usual, with fog rising from the river and slowly dissipating over the rooftops. This small town lived a quiet life where everyone knew everyone else, and the biggest news usually concerned the local school's football scores or arguments about new parking rules at City Hall. Jessica Morgan parked her beat-up blue Honda in her usual spot in front of the two-story brick building that housed Nelson Associates Insurance. It was 8 in the morning. Jessica climbed the steps, taking a set of keys out of her purse. 32 years old, 3 years with the company, and she still felt a slight tension every morning. It wasn't because of the work. She handled the paperwork, phone calls, and meetings with ease. The tension was because of him, Richard Nelson. She turned on the light in the small lobby and walked to her desk in the center of the open space. To her left was the glass partition of her boss's office, and to her right were 3 desks for the other employees. Jessica took off her coat and hung it on the back of a chair, smoothing her gray skirt. The coffee maker hummed, filling the office with a familiar aroma. Jessica took Richard's schedule for the day out of her desk drawer. 10 a.m., a call from insurance company representatives in Cleveland. 11:30 was a meeting with Tom Parker about insurance for his auto repair shop. 2 o'clock was lunch with the city council, a typical day for someone who considered himself one of the most influential people in Maple Ridge. The front door slammed and Jessica automatically straightened up, folding her hands on the desk. But it wasn't Richard. "Good morning, Jess," Phoebe Wilson smiled, shaking the raindrops from her red hair. "First one here again?" "Hi, Phoebe. Yes, I wanted to sort the mail before Mr. Nelson arrives." Phoebe walked over to her desk, glancing at her boss's closed office door. At 29, she was the company's junior manager, but she was already showing ambition that Richard didn't always like. Jessica noticed this by the way he frowned when Phoebe suggested new ideas or asked too many questions. "Is he in a good mood today?" Phoebe asked as she turned on her computer. "He's not here yet." "I see. He was unbearable yesterday. He yelled at Bill over some report that was perfectly fine, by the way." Jessica didn't respond. She knew Richard could be unfair to his employees, but she never discussed it with her colleagues. Professional distance was her protection. At 8:30, Richard Nelson entered the office. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying temples and a confident gait. His gray suit was immaculately pressed, his tie perfectly tied. Richard liked to look like a successful businessman, and he was good at it. "Good morning, Jessica," he said without slowing his pace toward his office. "Is the coffee ready?" "Yes, sir, and you have a call at 10. "I know. Bring me my coffee and the latest insurance reports." Jessica stood up, smoothed her skirt, and headed for the coffee machine. She knew how he liked his coffee. Strong, no sugar, with a dash of milk. In her 3 years on the job, she had learned all his habits, preferences, and moods. It was part of her job. When she entered his office with the tray, Richard was already sitting at his massive oak desk, looking through documents. His office was furnished with an air of luxury: leather chairs, a bookcase filled with legal reference books he never read, and a large painting of hunting dogs. "Put that on the desk," he said without looking up, "and close the door." Jessica placed the cup on the desk and turned toward the door. Her boss's closed office door usually meant an important phone call or meeting, but now they were alone. "Jessica," he called as she reached for the door handle. "Yes, sir?" "You stayed late at the office yesterday. Did you see what my wife was doing?" The question caught her off guard. Gabby Nelson sometimes came to the office, especially when she wanted to invite her husband to lunch or discuss family matters. She had indeed stopped by yesterday, around 6 in the evening. "She waited for you for about half an hour," Jessica replied cautiously. "Then she said she'd come back later." "I see. Did you notice anything else?" "No, sir." Richard nodded and returned to his documents. Jessica left the office, closing the door carefully behind her. His question had alarmed her, though she couldn't understand why. At 10:30, the office filled with the usual hustle and bustle of work. Bill Thompson sorted through insurance files, Phoebe worked with new clients, and Jessica answered calls and coordinated meetings. Life went on as it had every day for the past 3 years. But at noon, that rhythm was disrupted. Gabby Nelson walked into the office, and Jessica felt her heart beat faster. 38 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back into a neat bun and eyes the color of an autumn sky. Gabby was an English teacher at a local school, but she had quit her job 2 years ago when Richard insisted that the wife of a successful businessman should not work. "Hello, Jessica," Gabby said as she approached her desk. "Is Richard in?" "Yes, Mrs. Nelson. He's on a conference call, but he should be done any minute now." Gabby nodded and sat down in the visitor's chair next to Jessica's desk. She was wearing a simple blue dress that accentuated her slim figure, and she looked worried. "How are you?" she asked quietly. "Everything's fine," Jessica replied just as quietly, feeling Phoebe's curious gaze on them. Gabby nodded, clasping her hands together. Jessica noticed that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. It was strange. Gabby never took it off. "I need to talk to him," Gabby said, looking at the closed office door. "It's important." Before Jessica could respond, the office door opened and Richard emerged. Seeing his wife, he frowned. "Gabby, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," she said, getting up from the chair. "I'm busy. I have a meeting in half an hour." "Gabby, this is important." He looked at her intently, then at Jessica, then back at his wife. "All right, come in." Gabby went into the study, and Richard lingered at Jessica's desk. "Don't let anyone in," he said, "and no one is to disturb us." "Yes, sir." The office door closed, and Jessica was left alone with her thoughts again. Through the glass partition, she could see the silhouettes of Richard and Gabby, but she couldn't hear their conversation. Richard was gesturing, and Gabby shook her head. The conversation was clearly tense. "Do they often argue like that?" Phoebe asked, approaching Jessica's desk with a cup of coffee. "I don't follow Mr. Nelson's personal life," Jessica replied. Of course. It's just that in a small town, everyone knows everything, and they haven't looked very happy lately." Jessica said nothing, continuing to work on her documents. But she knew Phoebe was right. The Nelsons' marriage was falling apart, and it was obvious to anyone who cared to look. 20 minutes later, the office door opened and Gabby came out. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She quickly walked past Jessica's desk, saying only, "Goodbye." Richard appeared in the office doorway as the front door closed behind his wife. His face was grim. "Jessica," he called, "come here." She took her notebook and pen and entered the office. Richard was standing by the window, looking out at Gabby getting into her car. "Cancel my meeting with Parker," he said without turning around. "Reschedule it for tomorrow." "Okay. Is something wrong?" He turned to her, and Jessica saw something in his eyes that alarmed her. Anger? Suspicion? She couldn't tell. "Nothing to do with you," he replied sharply. "Just do as I say." "Of course, sir." Jessica left the office, feeling his eyes on her. Something had changed. She didn't know what, but she could feel it with every fiber of her being. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Richard took calls, reviewed documents, but periodically stopped and stared thoughtfully out the window. Phoebe tried several times to talk to Jessica, but received only one-word answers. At 6 o'clock, the office emptied. Bill left first, followed by Phoebe, who wished everyone a good evening. Jessica was gathering her documents when Richard came out of his office. "Are you staying late?" he asked. "I want to finish the insurance report." "Don't stay too late. And Jessica," he paused, "be careful." "What do you mean?" "Nothing in particular. It's just that in small towns, people like to gossip. Sometimes it can hurt." Jessica nodded, not understanding what he was getting at. Richard picked up his coat and headed for the door. "Good evening, sir. See you tomorrow." The door closed, and Jessica was left alone in the empty office. She sat down at her desk and tried to focus on her report, but her thoughts kept returning to the morning conversation between Richard and Gabby. What were they discussing? Why did Gabby look so upset? And what did Richard mean when he warned her about gossip? She worked for another hour before she realized she couldn't concentrate anymore. Jessica gathered her things, turned off the lights, and locked the office. It was already dark outside, with only a few streetlights illuminating the empty sidewalks of Maple Ridge. When she got to her small apartment on the outskirts of town, Jessica made a simple dinner and sat by the window with a cup of tea. She thought about Gabby, about how she looked today, fragile, lost, in need of support. The thought wouldn't leave her mind. At 10 o'clock, the phone rang. Jessica glanced at the display. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? Jessica, it's Gabby. Gabby Nelson. Jessica's heart began to race. Gabby? How did you get my number? From the office phone book. Listen, I need to talk to you. It's important. Now. Yes. Can you meet me at the park by the river? In half an hour? Jessica hesitated. Meeting her boss's wife late at night in a park seemed strange, but something in Gabby's voice made her agree. Okay, I'll be there. Thanks, Jessica. This is very important. The line went dead, and Jessica stood there with the phone in her hands, realizing that her orderly life was about to change forever. The park by the river in Maple Ridge was small, a few benches, a playground, and a path along the water. At 10:30 in the evening, it was empty, with only a few streetlights illuminating the paths. Jessica parked at the entrance and headed for the bench by the river where Gabby was already sitting. Thanks for coming, Gabby said when Jessica sat down next to her. In the lamplight, Jessica could see that Gabby had been crying. Her mascara was smudged under her eyes, and her hands were shaking as she took a handkerchief out of her purse. Gabby, what's wrong? Jessica asked, feeling a strange urge to hug this woman to comfort her. I don't know who else to talk to, Gabby began, staring at the dark water. In this town, everyone knows everything about everyone, and you seem like the only person I can trust. Jessica remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Gabby took a deep breath and turned to her. Richard wants a divorce, she said quietly. He thinks I'm cheating on him. Cheating? Jessica felt her heart sink. What do you mean? He thinks I'm having an affair. He said so today. He said he's noticed I've been acting strange, that I'm often away from home, that my mood has changed. Gabby started crying again, and Jessica instinctively put her hand on her shoulder. The touch was light, but Gabby flinched as if she had been electrocuted. I'm sorry, Jessica said quickly, removing her hand. No, it's okay, it's just... Gabby looked at her intently. It's just been so long since I've felt human warmth. A silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of water and the distant hum of cars on the highway. Jessica didn't know what to say. She felt something changing in the air between them, something dangerous and attractive at the same time. Gabby, she began cautiously, do you really have someone? Gabby turned sharply toward her, and in the light of the street lamp, Jessica saw something in her eyes that made her heart beat faster. Yes, Gabby said quietly. I do, but it's not what Richard thinks. What do you mean? Richard thinks I'm seeing another man. He even hired a private investigator to follow me. Can you believe it? His own wife, and he doesn't trust me. Jessica felt a chill in her stomach. If Richard had really hired a detective, their meeting in the park could have been exposed. But what did "it's not what Richard thinks" mean? Gabby, I don't understand. Jessica, Gabby interrupted, turning to face her. Have you ever felt trapped? Like you're not living your own life? Yes, Jessica replied honestly. Often. I married Richard when I was 23. He seemed reliable, successful. I thought I would fall in love with him over time, but 15 years have passed and I feel like a stranger in my own home. Gabby moved closer, and Jessica caught the scent of her perfume, something floral and delicate. For the past 2 years, I've been trying to figure out who I really am, what I want out of life. And I realized that, she paused, looking into Jessica's eyes, that I've never felt the way I'm supposed to feel about a man. Jessica stopped breathing. She knew where this was going, but she couldn't believe what was happening. Gabby, I know it sounds strange, crazy, but when I see you at the office, when we talk, I feel something real. For the first time in my life. Jessica looked at this beautiful woman sitting so close that their knees were almost touching. Gabby reached out and gently touched her cheek. Tell me I'm not crazy, she whispered. Tell me you feel something too. Jessica couldn't lie. She had felt something for Gabby since the first day they met, something she had tried to suppress, believing it was wrong and dangerous. I do, she admitted. But Gabby, it's impossible. You're my boss's wife. It would ruin all of our lives." "I know," Gabby said, not removing her hand. "But I can't pretend anymore. I can't live a lie." She leaned closer, and Jessica felt her breath on her lips. The world narrowed to that moment, to that bench in the empty park, to two women who had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. Their lips met in a slow, tender kiss. Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the world around her disappear. It was wrong, dangerous, crazy, and beautiful. When they pulled apart, Gabby smiled through her tears. "I've dreamed about this for so long," she said. "Gabby, we can't." "Why? Because it's not what society expects of us? Because I'm married to a man I don't love?" Jessica took her hands in hers. They were warm and soft. "Because it's dangerous. If Richard finds out, he already suspects something. Today he asked me point blank who I was seeing. When I said no one, he didn't believe me." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I'm not seeing any man. Technically, that's true," she smiled. "But he decided I was cheating on him." They sat in silence, holding hands. Jessica realized that her life had just changed dramatically. She was no longer just a secretary in a small town. Now she was a woman who had fallen in love with her boss's wife. "What should we do?" she asked. "I don't know," Gabby replied honestly. "But I know I don't want to pretend anymore. I can't go back to how things were before tonight. But I can't lose my job, it's all I have. We'll be careful, Richard mustn't find out. What if he does?" Gabby squeezed her hands tighter. "Then we'll deal with it together." They kissed again, longer and more passionately. Jessica felt her last doubts melt away. She was in love. For the first time in her life, she was truly in love. When they finally parted, it was past midnight. Gabby walked Jessica to her car and they exchanged phone numbers. "I'll call you tomorrow," Gabby said, "when Richard is at work." "Okay, just be careful." "I will. And you try to act normal at the office." Jessica nodded and got into her car. As she drove away, Gabby was still standing at the park entrance, illuminated by the yellow light of a street lamp. At home, Jessica couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She lay in bed, reliving every moment of the evening. The kisses, the touches, the words of confession. It all seemed unreal. In the morning, she woke up with a heavy heart. A new workday lay ahead, and she had to act normal around Richard. But how could she pretend when her heart was burning with new feelings? At the office, Jessica tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to Gabby. Every time the phone rang, she hoped it was her. Every time the front door opened, her heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be Gabby. Richard was in a bad mood. He spoke rudely to clients, yelled at Bill several times, and made Jessica redo documents that had no mistakes in them twice. "What's wrong with the boss?" Phoebe asked during lunch break. "He's especially unbearable today." "I don't know," Jessica lied. "Maybe he's having problems at home." "Yes, I heard that things aren't going well with his wife. My neighbor saw Gabby driving somewhere last night. It was late, after 11. Jessica felt the blood drain from her veins. If her neighbor had seen Gabby, then someone else could have noticed their meeting. "Phoebe," she said cautiously, "it's better not to gossip about your boss's personal life." "I'm not gossiping, just observing. In a small town, everyone knows everything." That was exactly what Jessica was afraid of. In Maple Ridge, it was impossible to keep secrets. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, her cell phone rang. An unknown number. "Jessica Morgan speaking." "Hi, it's me." Gabby's voice sounded agitated. "Can you talk?" Jessica looked around. Richard was in his office, Phoebe was talking to a client, and Bill was working on documents. "1 minute," she said and went outside. "Now I can talk. What's wrong?" "Richard made a scene again this morning. He demanded to know where I was last night." "What did you say?" "That I was out walking. He didn't believe me. Jessica, I'm afraid he suspects something. Maybe we should—" Jessica couldn't bring herself to say the words. "What? Break up?" Gabby's voice was pained. "Is that what you're thinking?" "I'm thinking about our lives, about what will happen if he finds out. And I'm thinking about how, for the first time in my life, I feel alive. Do you really want to give that up?" Jessica closed her eyes. She knew the right answer, but she couldn't say it. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want to." "Then let's meet tonight. I have an idea." "Where?" "There's an old fisherman's cabin on the other side of the river. No one will see us there." "Gabby, this is too risky." "Risky is continuing to live a lie. Will you meet me at 8? Jessica knew she should say no, but instead she agreed. "Okay, 8 o'clock." When she returned to the office, Richard was standing at her desk with a grim expression. "Where were you?" "I stepped out to take a phone call. It was a personal call." "During work hours?" "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." He looked at her intently, as if trying to understand something. "Jessica," he said finally, "you've been with our company for a long time. I trust you." "Thank you, sir. That's why I want to give you some advice. Be careful. In this town, walls have ears and people have long tongues." "I don't understand what you mean." "I think you do. Have a good day, Jessica." He returned to his office, leaving Jessica standing there, her hands shaking. Richard knew something, or suspected something. It was written all over his face. The rest of the day dragged on agonizingly slowly. Jessica kept catching Richard's glances, and Phoebe kept asking strange questions about her personal life. It seemed like everyone around her suspected something. At 7 o'clock, the office closed, and Jessica drove home. She knew she should cancel her meeting with Gabby, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She was in love, and that love was stronger than her fear. At 8 o'clock in the evening, she stood outside an old fisherman's hut, waiting for Gabby, and realizing that she was crossing another line of no return. The old fisherman's hut stood in a thicket of willows on the riverbank, a mile from town. Once, local fishermen used to gather here, but in recent years the building had been empty. The wooden walls were blackened by time. The roof was leaking in places, but inside, the old furniture and a kerosene lamp remained. Jessica arrived first. She parked her car behind some thick bushes so it couldn't be seen from the road and entered the hut. It smelled of damp and old wood, but the place was secluded, just what they needed. Gabby showed up 10 minutes later. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, her hair down. In the light of the kerosene lamp, she looked younger than her 38 years. "Hi," she said, stopping in the doorway. "Hi," Jessica replied, feeling her heart beat faster. They stood facing each other, not knowing how to begin. Yesterday's kiss in the park seemed like a dream, but now they were here, in this secluded place, and the reality of what was happening weighed heavily on them. "How are things at home?" Jessica asked. "Bad. Richard hardly talks to me. Just questions. Where I was, who I was with, why I came home so late." Gabby moved closer, and Jessica smelled her familiar perfume. "He's been acting strange at work too," Jessica said. "He warned me about the rumors today. I think he suspects something." "But what could he know? It was only yesterday." "I don't know. Maybe it's just intuition." Gabby took her hand. "Jessica, I don't regret what happened yesterday, and I don't want you to regret it either." "I don't regret it," Jessica replied honestly. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Everything. Losing my job, becoming an outcast in town. And you could lose everything. Your home, your position in society." Gabby sat down on the old sofa, pulling Jessica down beside her. "You know what I've realized over the years of being married? That you can lose yourself trying to hold on to something you don't need. I lived in a beautiful house with a man who didn't understand me, pretending to be happy for all the neighbors. But was I really happy? And now? Now I'm scared, confused, and I don't know what tomorrow will bring. But I'm alive, alive for the first time in many years." They kissed, and all her doubts faded away for a moment. Jessica felt the world shrink to this cabin, to this embrace, to this woman who had turned her life upside down. They spent 2 hours in the cabin talking and kissing. Gabby talked about her former job as a teacher, about how she had dreamed of writing a novel, but Richard thought it was a silly idea. Jessica talked about her childhood in a neighboring town, about how she had moved to Maple Ridge in search of a new life. "I always felt different," Jessica confessed. "At school, at university, all the girls talked about boys and I didn't understand what was so special about them." "Do you understand now?" Gabby asked, running her fingers through Jessica's hair. Now I understand that I was looking for the wrong thing. When they parted, it was already past 10 o'clock in the evening. Gabby left first, and Jessica stayed for a few more minutes to turn off the lamp and make sure they hadn't left any traces. At home, she couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The happiness of meeting Gabby was mixed with anxiety. What if someone had seen them driving to the river? What if Richard decided to follow his wife? On Wednesday morning, Jessica arrived at the office with a heavy heart. Richard was already there, and his mood was even worse than usual. "Good morning, sir," she said, entering his office with coffee. "Good morning," he grumbled, without looking up from his papers. "You have a meeting with Mr. Davis at 11. Cancel it." "Sir? I said cancel it and don't schedule anyone else for today." Jessica left the office, puzzled. Richard never canceled meetings without explanation. Something was definitely going on. At 10 o'clock, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He was tall, dressed in a gray suit, with attentive eyes. He approached Jessica's desk. "Excuse me, may I see Mr. Nelson? I have an appointment." "How can I help you?" "James Reeder, private investigator." Jessica felt the blood drain from her veins. So Gabby was right. Richard had hired a detective. "One moment," she said, trying to remain calm. She knocked on Richard's office door. "Mr. Reeder is here. Show him in and close the door." The detective entered the office and the door closed. Jessica returned to her desk, her hands shaking. Phoebe looked curiously at the closed door. "Who is that man?" "I don't know. A client, probably." "That's strange. Usually all clients make appointments in advance." Jessica didn't answer. She tried to concentrate on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to the conversation that was now taking place behind the closed door. What could the detective have said? Had he seen them meeting in the park? Did he know about the cabin? Half an hour later, the office door opened. The detective came out first, nodded to Jessica, and headed for the exit. Richard appeared in the doorway. His face was grim. "Jessica, come here," he said. She picked up her notebook and entered the office. Richard was sitting at his desk, sorting through some photographs. "Sit down," he said, pointing to a chair across from the desk. Jessica sat down, trying not to look at the photos. But out of the corner of her eye, she saw that one of them showed a car that looked very much like her Honda. "Jessica," Richard began, "we've known each other for 3 years. I consider you an honest and trustworthy person." "Thank you, sir. So I want to ask you a direct question, and I hope you'll answer honestly." Jessica nodded, feeling her heart beating in her throat. "Do you know where my wife was the night before last?" "No, sir. I don't keep tabs on the personal lives of your loved ones." "Even if that personal life concerns you?" "I don't understand what you're talking about." Richard took one of the photos and placed it in front of Jessica. The black and white image showed a parking lot near a park, with 2 figures sitting on a bench near the entrance. "Is that you?" Jessica looked at the photo. The quality wasn't very good, and it was difficult to make out the faces, but she recognized her clothes. "It looks like me," she said cautiously. "Is that my wife?" "Possibly." "What were you doing in the park late at night?" Jessica thought quickly. Admitting the truth would mean the end of everything. Her job, her relationship with Gabby, maybe even her safety. But lying could have consequences too. "Gabby called me. She said she needed to talk to someone." "About what?" "About your relationship. She was upset. She thought you wanted a divorce." "And what did you tell her?" "That it wasn't my business. That family problems should be dealt with within the family." Richard looked at her intently, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. "Nothing else happened?" "No, sir, we just talked." "I see." He gathered his photos. "Jessica, I don't want my wife involving employees in our family affairs. If she comes to you again, tell her you can't help her." "Of course, sir." "You can go now." Jessica stood up and headed for the door. Richard stopped her at the exit. "And one more thing. If I find out you lied to me, there will be serious consequences, not just for you." "I understand, sir." When she left the office, Jessica felt as if she had just walked through a minefield. Phoebe immediately came up to her. "What did that detective want?" I don't know, Mr. Nelson didn't say. Jess, you look pale. Are you okay? Yes, just tired. But Phoebe wouldn't let up. She was a smart girl and sensed that something was wrong. Listen, she said quietly. I don't want to pry, but you've been acting strange lately, and so has the boss. What's going on? Nothing much. Work problems? Work? Jessica, we're colleagues. If you're having trouble, maybe I can help? Thanks, Phoebe. But everything's under control. But that wasn't true. Nothing was under control. Richard knew about the meeting in the park, hired a detective, and made threats. Sooner or later, he would find out the whole truth. During lunch break, her cell phone rang. Gabby. Can you talk? Wait! Jessica stepped outside. Gabby, we're in danger. Richard hired a detective. He has photos of us meeting in the park. What? How's that possible? He suspected you and had you followed. He called me to his office today and showed me the photos. Oh my God. What did you say? That we were just talking. He seemed to believe me, but he warned me that if he found out the truth, there would be serious consequences. Jessica, I'm scared. If he knows about the park, he might know about the cabin. We need to stop seeing each other, at least for a while. No! Gabby's voice was panicked. I can't. It's the only thing keeping me sane. Gabby, be reasonable. If he catches us again, then let him catch us. I'm tired of hiding. Don't say that. Think about the consequences. I think about them every minute. But I also think about what I could lose. Jessica closed her eyes. She didn't want to end the relationship either, but common sense told her that this was the only way to avoid disaster. Let's meet tonight, Gabby said. One last time to discuss everything. Where? The cabin is too dangerous. There's an old church on the outskirts of town, St. Stephen's. It's abandoned, but you can get in through the back door. Gabby, please, I need to see you. Jessica knew she should refuse, but love proved stronger than fear. Okay, 8 o'clock. Thank you. I love you, Jessica. I love you too. Back at the office, Jessica found Phoebe talking to Bill. They were discussing something in hushed tones and fell silent when she approached. What were you talking about? She asked. Work, Bill replied quickly. Phoebe is helping me with a report. But Jessica could see that wasn't true. They were talking about her, or about the situation in the office. Paranoia began to take hold of her. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Richard didn't leave his office, taking only the most important calls. Phoebe kept glancing at Jessica strangely. Even Bill, usually immersed in his documents, seemed alarmed. At 6:30, Jessica was about to leave when Richard came out of his office. Jessica, stay a minute. She watched her colleagues leave and approached his desk. Yes, sir. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation this morning. And you know what's bothering me? What exactly? My wife has never before turned to strangers with family problems. It's not in her nature. Maybe she was particularly upset. Maybe, or maybe you're lying to me. Jessica met his gaze. I told you the truth, Mr. Nelson. I hope so. Because if I find out there's something going on between you and my wife, it will be bad for all of us. What do you mean? I mean that in a small town, reputation is everything. Lose that and you lose your job, your friends, your chance to find a new place. And my wife would lose a lot more. The threat was transparent. Jessica nodded. I understand. Good. See you tomorrow then. As she left the office, Jessica felt cornered. Richard clearly knew or suspected something. The detective was still following them. Her colleagues were starting to ask questions. But despite all that, she still went to her meeting with Gabby. The abandoned St. Stephen's Church had stood on the outskirts of Maple Ridge for 15 years. Services had once been held here, but the congregation had moved to a new building in the city center, leaving the old church to slowly decay. The tall Gothic windows were boarded up, but the back door still gave way. Jessica arrived first. Inside, it smelled of mold and old wood. Moonlight filtered through the cracks in the boards, casting strange shadows on the walls. She sat down on one of the remaining pews and waited. Gabby appeared 10 minutes later. Even in the dim light, she could see that she had been crying. What happened? Jessica asked, hugging her. Richard knows, Gabby sobbed. He knows everything. What do you mean? He showed me the photos tonight, not just the ones from the park. There are pictures of us walking to the cabin, holding hands. Jessica, he saw everything. Jessica felt the world crumbling around her. If Richard had such evidence, there was no point in denying it. What did he say? That I'm disgracing his name. That I'm ruining his reputation in town. He demanded I tell him the name of my lover. Did you tell him? No, he thinks it's a man, some stranger. I didn't try to dissuade him. Gabby pressed herself closer to her, trembling all over. But he said he'd talk to you tomorrow, that he'd fire you if you didn't tell him the truth, and that he'd make sure you never found work in this area again. What will happen to you? Divorce, without a penny. He can do it. He has good lawyers. I'll be left with nothing. They sat in silence, realizing the magnitude of the disaster. 3 days ago, they were ordinary people with ordinary problems. Now their lives lay in ruins. Maybe we should tell him everything, Jessica said. Confess everything. And then what? He'll fire me anyway, and he'll fire you. Plus, the whole town will know. They don't look kindly on relationships like that in Maple Ridge. Then what do we do? Gabby raised her head, and Jessica saw something in her eyes that frightened her. I don't know, but I won't let him ruin our lives because of his pride. Gabby, what do you mean? Nothing. We'll think of something. They spent another hour in the church, making plans that seemed increasingly desperate. Move to another city? They didn't have any money. Go into hiding? Where and how? Every option ended in a dead end. When they parted, Gabby hugged Jessica tightly. Whatever happens, remember, I love you. And I love you. We'll get through this. But on the way home, Jessica realized she had no idea how they would get through it. Richard had them by the throat, and with every hour that passed, his grip tightened. At home, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, running through possible scenarios for the next day in her head. Richard would demand the truth. She would confess. He would fire her. Her reputation would be ruined. Gabby would be left with no means of support. But were there any other options? On Thursday morning, Jessica arrived at the office with a heavy heart. Richard was already there, and his mood couldn't have been gloomier. Good morning, Jessica, he said when she brought him his coffee. We have an important conversation to have today. Yes, sir. After lunch, when everyone's gone. The day dragged on agonizingly slowly. Phoebe tried several times to talk to Jessica, but got only one-word answers. Bill worked on his documents, periodically glancing anxiously at his boss's office. At 4 o'clock, Phoebe and Bill left. Jessica was left alone with Richard. Jessica, he called from his office. Come in and close the door. She entered the office, and he pointed to a chair across from his desk. A folder with photographs lay on the desk. You lied to me yesterday, he said without preamble. Sir? Don't pretend. I know the truth. He opened the folder and spread out the photographs. Jessica saw herself and Gabby at the entrance to the cabin, holding hands, kissing in the moonlight. Do you recognize them? Jessica remained silent. Denial was pointless. So my wife is cheating on me with a woman, Richard continued. With my own secretary. Can you imagine how I feel? Mr. Nelson, he barked. Shut up. You've worked for my company for 3 years. I trusted you, and you seduced my wife. That's not true. It just happened. It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that it has to stop. Richard stood up and walked over to the window. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow you'll write a letter of resignation, voluntary. I'll give you a letter of recommendation, but on one condition. You leave Maple Ridge and never come back. And if I refuse, then I'll publish these photos in the local newspaper. Plus, I'll tell all our clients about your inclinations. I think after that, you'll have a hard time finding work anywhere within 100 miles. Jessica felt anger boiling up inside her. You can't do that. I can, and I will. I'll deal with my wife separately. What are you going to do to her? That's none of your business. But you can be sure she'll pay dearly for her infidelity. Richard, please. Mr. Nelson is here for you. This conversation is over. I'll expect your resignation tomorrow morning. Jessica stood up and headed for the door. At the exit, she paused. What if I tell everyone that you hired a detective to follow your own wife, that you make jealous scenes for her? Do you think that will earn you respect in this town? Richard turned to her, and she saw rage in his eyes. Try it. Let's see who they believe, a respected businessman or a pervert who seduces other men's wives? Jessica left the office, trembling with anger and despair. Richard had left her no choice. He would destroy both her life and Gabby's, just to get revenge. She gathered her things and left the office. It was cool outside, and the autumn wind was blowing the last leaves off the trees. Jessica got into her car but didn't start the engine. She thought. Richard had won. He held all the cards. But what if suddenly a crazy thought popped into her head? Dangerous, impossible, but the only thing that could save them both. What if Richard were no longer around? Jessica pushed the thought away. She was not a murderer, but the thought kept coming back. What if it wasn't murder? What if it looked like an accident? She knew Richard had heart problems. He was taking medication but hiding it from those around him, afraid of appearing weak. What if he had a heart attack? Jessica remembered a documentary she had recently watched. It was about a woman who poisoned her husband with antifreeze. Ethylene glycol is tasteless and odorless, acts slowly, and the symptoms are very similar to a heart attack. The company garage had cans of antifreeze for the company cars. Jessica had access to it. She started the car and drove home, not believing she was seriously considering murder. But the more she thought about it, the more real the plan seemed. At home, Jessica called Gabby. Hi, it's me. Can you talk? Richard went to see his lawyer. He's preparing divorce papers. Gabby, I need to see you, right now. What's wrong? Richard knows everything. He showed me the photos. He's demanding that I quit my job and leave town. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Meet me at the cabin in an hour. I'll explain everything. At the cabin, Jessica told Gabby about her conversation with Richard, about the threats, about how they had no choice. So it's over, Gabby said, crying. He's destroyed us. Not necessarily, Jessica said quietly. What do you mean? I have an idea, but it's very dangerous. Jessica told her about her plan. Gabby listened with horror and admiration at the same time. You can't do that, she said. That's murder. It's self-defense. He wants to ruin our lives. But if you get caught, we won't get caught. It'll look like a heart attack. Gabby was silent for a long time, thinking about what she had heard. What if something goes wrong? Then I'll say I acted alone, that you knew nothing about it. Jessica, no. I won't let you risk yourself for me. I'm doing this for both of us. They discussed the plan late into the night. Gabby tried to talk Jessica out of it, but she was adamant. It was the only way. The next day, Friday, Jessica came to work with a resignation letter she had written in advance, but she had no intention of handing it in. In the afternoon, when Richard left for a meeting, she went down to the garage and took a small bottle of antifreeze. She hid it in her purse. In the evening, when the office was empty, Jessica called Richard. Mr. Nelson, this is Jessica. Can I talk to you? I thought we discussed everything yesterday. I have a proposal, a compromise that could work for everyone. What kind of compromise? It's better not to discuss it in person. Can you come back to the office? Now, it's almost 8. It won't take long, and I think you'll be interested in my proposal. Richard paused. All right, I'll be there in half an hour. Jessica made coffee, adding the contents of the bottle to 1 cup. The antifreeze dissolved without a trace. Richard arrived at 8:30. He was irritated and in a hurry. So, what's the offer? Sit down. Would you like some coffee? Let's get down to business. Of course. Jessica handed him the cup of poisoned coffee and took hers. I'm ready to leave town, but on one condition. What is it? You don't touch Gabby. She will remain your wife, and you will not take revenge on her. Richard took a sip of coffee. You're in no position to make demands. Just listen. I'm leaving, and we'll never see each other again. But it's not Gabby's fault. I seduced her. Even if that's true, she agreed. She was unhappy in her marriage. She was looking for understanding. Richard finished his coffee and put the cup on the table. It doesn't matter. The decision has been made. Tomorrow you file for divorce and leave. I'll deal with my wife myself. Richard, please. This conversation is over. He stood up, but suddenly staggered and grabbed the back of the chair. Something's wrong, he muttered. What's the matter? I feel dizzy and nauseous. Jessica stood up, feigning concern. Should we call a doctor? No, it'll pass. Richard tried to take a step, but his legs wouldn't hold him. Jessica, help me. She took him by the arm and helped him into a chair. You're having heart problems, she said. It could be a heart attack. Yes, I am. Richard clutched his chest. Your medicine is in your jacket pocket. Jessica found a bottle of pills but didn't give them to Richard. What are you doing? He croaked. What I should have done a long time ago. Understanding flashed in his eyes. It was you. Antifreeze in my coffee. The symptoms were very similar to a heart attack. Richard tried to stand up, but the poison was already taking effect. His coordination was impaired and he was having difficulty breathing. Why? He whispered. You wanted to ruin our lives. I was just defending myself. Call an ambulance, Jessica said. Right now. She grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number. Hello? I need an ambulance. My boss is unconscious. I think he's having a heart attack. While she was talking to the dispatcher, Richard tried to reach the phone on the table, but his hands wouldn't obey him. Address? Asked the dispatcher. Jessica gave the office address. Is the victim breathing? Barely, his pulse is weak. Please hurry. The ambulance is on its way. Don't hang up. Jessica placed the phone next to Richard and leaned over him. The ambulance is on its way, but I'm afraid they won't make it. Richard tried to say something, but only foam came out of his mouth. His eyes were filled with horror and understanding. 15 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. Jessica met the doctors at the entrance, pretending to be panicked. He's in the office. He just collapsed and started choking. The doctors examined Richard, but it was too late. His heart had stopped. An hour later, the police arrived. Detective Mark Cole examined the scene and questioned Jessica. Everything looked like a typical heart attack in a man with a heart condition. Thank you for your help, Miss Morgan. We'll be in touch if we need any further information. Jessica drove home feeling both free and devastated. She had killed a man, but she had also saved herself and Gabby. Now, all she could do was wait and hope that no one would suspect the truth. Richard Nelson's funeral was held on Monday. The entire business elite of Maple Ridge came to pay their last respects to one of the most influential men in town. Jessica stood in the back rows, watching Gabby, who was dressed in black, receiving condolences. Gabby looked like the perfect grieving widow, pale, reserved, leaning on her sister, who had come from a neighboring state. But when their eyes met, Jessica saw a question in her eyes that made her blood run cold. After the ceremony, Gabby approached her. Jessica, thank you for coming. I know how hard it must have been to be there when it happened. My condolences, Jessica replied formally. Can we talk? Tomorrow? I need to take care of some things at the company. Jessica nodded, feeling her heart beating in her throat. The next day, Gabby arrived at the office. The company was closed for a week due to mourning, but Jessica needed to sort through documents and prepare matters for transfer to the heirs. How are you holding up? Gabby asked, sitting down across from Jessica's desk. Still in shock. It was so sudden. Yes, sudden, Gabby repeated, looking at her intently. Jessica, what exactly happened on Friday night? I told you. Richard called and asked me to come back to the office. We were working, and then he had a seizure. What were you working on? Jessica hesitated. She hadn't prepared the details of this story. Insurance payments, the quarterly report. I see. Gabby paused. What did he want to talk about during our last meeting? You said you had a proposal. What proposal? You called him on Friday night. You mentioned some kind of compromise. Jessica realized she was trapped. Gabby knew about the call. I wanted to negotiate the terms of my resignation. Ask for more time to find a new job. And what did he say? He refused. He was adamant. Gabby stood up and walked over to the window. You know what's strange? On Friday morning, Richard told me that you were going to hand in your resignation and leave town. He was very pleased. He said the problem was solved. He was probably glad to be rid of me. But then why did he come back to the office? If everything had already been decided. Jessica didn't know what to say. Gabby turned to her. Jessica, look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. What happened on Friday night? I told you the truth. All of it? There was a long pause. The two women stared at each other, unspoken suspicion hanging between them. Gabby, what do you think? I think my husband was a healthy 45-year-old man. Yes, he had heart problems, but they were under control. And then, just when he was about to ruin our lives, he had a fatal heart attack. It happens. It happens. Gabby sat back down. But you know what else happens? People kill to protect what they love. Jessica paled. Are you accusing me of murder? I'm not saying anything. Just thinking out loud. Gabby, how can you think that? I loved you. I still do. That's exactly why I'm thinking it. Love makes people do crazy things. At that moment, Detective Mark Cole entered the office. He was a tall man with piercing gray eyes and a tired face. Excuse me for interrupting. Detective Cole, Maple Ridge Police Department. Mrs. Nelson? Yes, that's me. My condolences. Can I ask you a few questions? Of course. This is Jessica Morgan, my husband's secretary. We've met. Cole nodded to Jessica. Miss Morgan, could you leave us alone? I'd like to speak with Mrs. Nelson in private. Jessica left but remained in the hallway, trying to hear the conversation. The voices were muffled, but she could make out a few words. Strange behavior in her husband. Marital problems. Private investigator. Half an hour later, the detective came out. When he saw Jessica, he stopped. Miss Morgan, I have a few more questions. Could you come to the station this afternoon? Of course. Is something wrong? Just a routine procedure. You see, the autopsy results were interesting. Jessica felt the ground slip away from under her feet. In what way? We'll talk about it at the station. See you later. Cole left, and Gabby came out of the office with a grim expression. What did he ask you? Jessica inquired. About our relationship, whether I knew about the surveillance, about your meetings. What did you say? The truth. That we had an affair, that Richard knew and threatened us. Gabby, why? Because he already knows everything. He has the detective's report, photos. There's no point in lying. Now I'm in trouble. We're in trouble, Gabby corrected her. If you did what I think you did, then we're both in this together. At the police station, Detective Cole met Jessica in a small office. A thick folder lay on the table. Miss Morgan, thank you for coming. I want to show you something. He opened the folder and took out a document. Mr. Nelson's autopsy results. Cause of death, acute ethylene glycol poisoning. What does that mean? Ethylene glycol is the main ingredient in antifreeze. In large doses, it's lethal. The symptoms are very similar to a heart attack. Jessica tried to look surprised. How is that possible? He didn't drink antifreeze. No, but someone added it to his coffee. We found traces in the cup on his desk. My God. So he was murdered? It looks that way. Cole looked closely at her face. The question is who and why. I have no idea. You don't? I think you do. You see, Miss Morgan, I did a little investigating. I talked to your colleagues and studied the surveillance footage. Jessica felt sweat beading on her forehead. And what did you find out? That on Thursday afternoon, you went down to the company garage. The security guard recorded it. The garage is where the antifreeze for the company cars is kept. I could have gone down there for a variety of reasons. You could have. But there's something else. Your colleague, Phoebe Wilson, told us an interesting story. Cole took out another document. She says you've been acting strangely in recent weeks. You were nervous, receiving mysterious phone calls, and leaving the office frequently. And on Friday evening, she saw you returning to the building. That's not a crime. No, but adding poison to someone's coffee is a crime. The detective opened another folder. Miss Morgan, you had a motive. Mr. Nelson found out about your affair with his wife. He threatened to fire you and ruin your reputation. You knew your life would be destroyed. That doesn't mean I killed him. No, but there's other evidence. For example, your fingerprints on the antifreeze can in the garage. Fresh fingerprints. Jessica realized the trap was closing in, but she still tried to fight back. Detective, I understand that I look suspicious, but I had no reason to kill Richard. I was going to quit and leave. You were going to? Then why wasn't your resignation letter submitted on Friday evening? It's still in your purse. Cole nodded to the police officer at the door, who brought Jessica's purse. May I? He took out a folded piece of paper. Resignation letter, written but not submitted. Why? Jessica was silent. Everything was falling apart. Miss Morgan, the detective said gently, I understand what happened. You fell in love. This man threatened to destroy your happiness. You panicked. That doesn't make you a monster. I didn't kill him. Then explain to me how antifreeze got into his coffee. Who else had access to the coffee maker that evening? I don't know. But I do. Only you. The security guard reported that no one else was in the building except you and Mr. Nelson. Cole stood up and walked over to the window. You know what struck me most about this case? Your call to emergency services? You sounded very panicked, but there's one detail. What is it? You told the dispatcher that Mr. Nelson was having a heart attack, but how did you know? The symptoms of antifreeze poisoning include nausea, dizziness, and difficulty breathing. It could have been anything. He had heart problems, I assumed. Or you knew what was going on because you put the poison in the coffee yourself. A long silence. Jessica knew the game was up. I want a lawyer, she said quietly. Of course, but first I have to arrest you. Jessica Morgan, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Richard Nelson. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the last remnants of her former life crumble to dust. In the holding cell, she thought about Gabby. What would happen to her now? Would she stay in town? Would she be able to forgive her? The answer came a week later. Gabby sold her house and her company, took all her money and left, without saying goodbye, without writing a single word. At the trial, Jessica confessed to the murder. Her lawyer tried to get leniency, citing emotional distress and provocation on the part of the victim, but the jury was unmoved. Murder is murder. 25 years without parole. Gabby did not appear in court. Jessica learned that she had moved to California, changed her last name, and started a new life. Sometimes she thought she saw her photo on social media, happy, with a new partner, new friends. But maybe it was just her imagination. Jessica sat in her cell reading this interview and thought about how things could have been different. If only they had been honest from the start. If only they hadn't given in to fear. If only they had chosen truth over lies. But it was too late. Richard was dead. Gabby was gone. And she would spend the best years of her life behind bars. Love really did make people do crazy things, but the price of that madness was too high. And in the old fisherman's hut by the river, people sometimes found wilted flowers. No one knew who brought them there. But the locals said it was the ghost of a lost love wandering along the shore, mourning what might have been.